My name is Ae Hee Lee. I'll be the interviewer. Today is the 6th of April 2016. We are located in the ILS conference room, the Samora Library, and at the campus of the University of Notre Dame at South Bend, Indiana. And I will be interviewing Rhina P. Can you tell me how
Espaillat.
Espaillat.
Yes.
Trilingual poet.
Well, not trilingual. I don't speak Yiddish, but I sort of grasp it. I can get the gist of a conversation if I listen long enough.
Then bilingual poet.
That's right.
That's more accurate. Bilingual poet and translator who has published 11 collections of poetry.
Yes, and a collection of essays and a collection of short stories.
Yes, and it's the recipient of numerous prizes, including T.S. Eliot Prize and Richard Wilbur Award. And I would like to thank you for being part of this oral history project with us.
Well, I'm grateful to you.
And for the purposes of documentation, could you tell us your full name and date and place of birth and where you're living today?
Well, I come from a Latin American country, the Dominican Republic, where we used to, in my day, give children very long names to honor all the relatives and all the saints. So I'm going to give you what you asked for. Take a deep breath. This is my whole name. Rhina Polonia Altagracia Margarita Espaillat Brache Batista Piña de Moskowitz.
That's beautiful. Long but beautiful.
Nobody does that anymore.
It's great though, they should. And let's see, date and place of birth?
I was born on January 20th, 1932 in Santo Domingo, which is the oldest surviving city in the Americas.
Wow.
The oldest surviving European city in the Americas.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, right.
And where are you living today?
I'm living in Newburyport, Massachusetts, which I love. We've been there since 1990.
Wow, 1990.
And before that it was New York City, which I also adore.
Well, thank you. And also one more starting question. Could you tell us more about your childhood and your family?
Well, I come from four very large, warm, extended families in the Dominican Republic, and because we became, in 1937, my parents became exiles, political exiles from a dreadful dictatorship. I pretty much lost all four families because my father could not go back, and so I grew up here from the age of 7 on. In 1939, I came to join my family. They had been here 2 years before me. My great uncle was a representative of the Dominican Republic in Washington, D.C. And that year, the dictator murdered about 20,000 Haitians on the border between the two countries, which share an island. And he wrote the dictator a letter that said that he could not approve of the murder of innocent people and so forth. So of course he was named an enemy of the fatherland, and the people who worked for him, like my father, who was secretary of the legation, they were all exiled. And they pretty much lost their country. And I was sent for in 1939 and came and joined them in New York City. They were living there by then. So that's how I grew up in, I guess, the melting pot of the whole world, surrounded by people who had come for one reason or another from every corner of the world. I met the first Jewish people I had ever encountered, the first Asian people, a great many people from places I couldn't even locate on the map. And my parents made it clear that these were people who, like us, were running from something. So I identified very early with the entire immigrant community that has made up this country. I felt this is what America is. It's a country of people who need shelter, who need protection, and we found it.
I really like that idea of America. Like,
it's what we came for, isn't it?
I guess shifting towards like your writing, your poetry. In another interview, you said you fell in love with poetry at the age of 4 or 5.
That's right.
In your grandmother's house in the Dominican Republic.
Yes.
Even though you had like such a long love relationship since you were young with poetry. You published your first collection, Lapsing to Grace, at the age of 60, if I'm correct, and have been very prolific since then. What made you wait, and what made you think this is the time to publish?
Well, I had really been writing poem by poem and had not thought of putting together a book because as far as I thought, I was a kid writing poetry, you know, and real poets, quote unquote, real poets had to be grown-ups, and they had to be very special people, and I just didn't feel I was ripe for that. And it took me a long time to get used to the idea that I could also send a manuscript to a publisher and get rejections like everybody else, which I did. And finally it was asked for, as a matter of fact, by the publisher, who said, I've been seeing your work in this magazine and that one, and if you send me a manuscript, I'm willing to look at it. So that's how I finally ended up with Bennett and Kitchell, who published my first one. And after that, I had more nerve. It's a matter of having chutzpah.
Right. It's true. I'm still starting, but I already feeling it.
It's hard getting that first chutzpah, isn't it?
Yes, it is.
Yeah. You stick to it.
Thank you. In your books, like, you use a lot of rhyme and meter, and you're very skilled at it. And your poetry, I felt it was very musical, and it speaks to the reader very directly, like small but hard and precious truths, I felt. How do you feel your writing developed through time, or how do you think it changed over time?
Oh yes, I think it changes as you read other people, and as the times change you also. I think your emotions change you.
Yeah.
And you begin to admire something that is new to you, and you say, I could do that maybe if I learn it, and so forth. And I don't think that it's right to stick to something because it's what you've done so far. I think that it's good to experiment.
Right. So what are the things you felt like you wanted to experiment more with?
Well, I wanted a little more freedom, although I've never felt that form inhibits freedom. I think, on the contrary, that form is what, because it gives you something that is resisting you.
Right.
And when you resist, it's like any game. When you resist in a game, you're motivated to think around the obstacles.
Right. Even more creatively.
That's right. You become more creative. Rhyme, for instance, everybody thinks, rhyme must keep you from doing things. It must keep you tied up in knots. But it doesn't. What it does is to liberate the imagination, because then you begin to see connections between rhyming words that you had not thought were pertinent to what you're thinking of. But they end up being right. So unless something teases you into trying a new thought, you tend to stay in the same place all the time. I think that form is generative of new thought and new nerve too.
Right.
Yeah. And I also like the fact that you can use it so many ways. I was just talking to David before over breakfast, and we were talking about form and what it does. And I said, what form does is to let you tease the reader, play with him a little bit. You make him a kind of promise. I'm rhyming these 2 lines so you can expect order from now on. But then in the 3rd line, you give him disorder. You give him something new. And now he's nervous. And I like making the reader nervous because it keeps him on his toes.
Right. Engage with the text.
That's right. You create, the form allows you to create a game with the unseen reader.
Right.
And then you're having fun with him.
That sounds fun.
It is fun.
I'm also aware you taught English in the New York City public schools for many years.
Yes, I did.
You're also the founding member of Fresh Meadows Poets and Powwow River Poets.
That's right, yes.
And for several years, you also coordinated Newbury Port Art Association's annual poetry contest.
Yes.
I want to hear more about your thoughts about like community, because this is very important too in your work and in your life, and the role you think poetry has in it.
Oh, I think poetry is very important to human life. I think that during the 20th century, unfortunately, when difficulty became fashionable, it became the style to be less well understood.
Right, more busy.
more invisible, really, as if you were speaking to the reader behind your hand like this. But I like to take my hand away. I like to speak to the individual reader and also to the community, because I learned poetry in my grandmother's house, and she was very much part of the community. She used to bring people together. She used to like combining the arts, for instance, so that people brought their musical instruments with them, the guitars and the violin, and she played the piano and she played the guitar herself very well too. So she liked combining things and bringing in people who might not even know that they love poetry or that they're ready for it. And I think that's a good thing, because you're enriching the individual life that way. And you're also giving the community more glue. The arts are glue that bring people together. So I think it's important to appeal to the community and to let people know that poetry has something for them, that all the arts do, all the arts. I used to paint too.
I actually have a question about that. But before that, would you mind reading us one of your poems?
I would love to.
I have here many bookmarks. Would you mind reading us, Bra?
Well, this was inspired by a real shopping trip to a local department store, and this happened more or less. Bra. What a good fit. But the label says Honduras. Alas, I am union forever. Yes, both breasts and the heart between them committed to U.S. labor. But such a splendid fit. And the label tells me the woman who made it, bronze as the breasts now in it, speaks the language I dream in. I count in Spanish the pesos she made stitching this breast divider. Will they go for her son's tuition, her daughter's wedding? The thought is a lovely fit, but oh, the label. And oh, those pesos that may be pennies and hard-earned. Was it son or daughter who made this, unschooled, unwedded? How old? 14? 10? That fear is a tight fit. If only the heart could be worn like the breast, divided, nosing in two directions for news of the wide world, sniffing here and there for justice, for mercy. How burdened every choice is with politics, guilt, expensive with duty, heavy as breasts in need of this perfect fit whose label says Honduras.
Thank you.
And I ended up not buying it.
Oh.
Because I am very labor oriented. My husband and I were both early organizers of the teachers union. And I feel that it's very important to advance the lot of the working person.
Right.
Yeah. So I was very divided there, just like the breast, because you want to help those workers in the other country too.
Right.
Things are unfair the world over. That's as close as I come to X-rated.
Really? Yeah, but I really enjoy that book. So you write about family, daily life, daily things like highway apple trees, but there are also many poems that are reflective or even confessional too in your collections about women, about belief, and that overlap with all the previously mentioned themes. Would you say you write about these subjects by choice or necessity?
It's very hard to tell the difference.
Right.
Because you really don't choose your themes. They choose you. But if you write, you know that already.
That's true.
That your themes and your attitudes toward them sort of pull at you. They pull at your sleeve and they say, write about me. So is it choice or is it desire? I'm not sure. I tell my students that you know, what they have to learn, what they can learn from a teacher of poetry, is the how, but life gives them the what. What they experience in life is really the what of their poems. It has to be, so that all they need to do is learn to make the container, because there is so much in there to fill the containers.
Right.
Every human being is full of what.
On that note, like, there was not like a lot of them, but there was definitely a little streak of like, you'd write about women in your poems
Yes.
too a lot, and so I wondered if you could talk to us more about your identity as a woman and how that affects your work too.
Well, I've been very fortunate because I had a wonderful father who felt that women were human beings and had rights. And I married a man who joined him in that opinion, so I've never had to struggle personally to justify myself as a woman, but I know that many people do. Not only in other countries, but in this one too on occasion. The fact that women earn less for the same kind of work and the same degree of work, that there are many women still in abusive or repressive relationships. So I speak for them because I know that this is very old in the third world, and I come from Latin America, where women very often did not have the rights that they deserved. And I think it's important for every human being, whatever his nature, whatever his sexual orientation or identity and so on, whatever his religion or class or birth and so on, we all deserve what is coming to us.
As I said, I read a lot of your books, and they all like really touched me. But Lapsing to Grace is the only one with, and it's the first one, right?
Yes.
The only one with drawings included in the
Yes.
book.
Yes.
You were talking about how you like bringing different mediums to
Yes.
with poetry, like music we talked about.
Yes.
But I was wondering, what about drawing, and what prompted you to fashion the book this way?
I was still doing artwork at that time. I used to draw and also do watercolors. And I thought at first that I would be an artist because I loved painting so much and drawing so much. But gradually the writing took over. It was obsessive, you know. But I also love music, which I do not know how to perform. Unfortunately, I sing, but I don't play a musical instrument. And since I saw my grandmother perform and recite poetry in the with music in the background, I learned this art that she taught me. It's called melopeia, old Greek fashion. And when you see the Greek statues or paintings with the singer holding a lyre on his shoulder, what he is doing is performing melopeia. He's reciting his words, not singing them. They're not lyrics. He's reciting with the music in the background. And I found it absolutely beguiling, just beautiful, beautiful to listen to. So I taught it to some poets in this country, and now it's become popular in where I live. And I performed them with a wonderful guitarist who lives there. His name is John Tavano. And we even have a little CD that we put out. We're working on another one. We want to do another one later this year. And what we do is find poems, not necessarily mine, but by all sorts of people, poems that we both like. And John comes up with music, sometimes original, because he also composes. And sometimes music by other people. And they have become very popular.
Oh, it's such a shame we don't have a guitar. Well, actually, I don't play either, so I wouldn't probably.
I wish I had brought one of those little CDs, but I didn't think of it.
Well, what are they called? Or are they called after, like...
This one is called simply Melopeia.
Simply Melopeia.
Melopeia, that's its title. And I don't know what we'll call the next one, but now other people are doing them. It's caught on.
So the drawings were also a way of combining?
It's another form of a combination between poetry and some other sister art. Actually, you can do poetry to dance too.
Oh yes, yes.
Yeah,
I know that
I've seen
Luis
before.
is very like into that too.
Yeah, oh, it's
Yeah.
wonderful. It is just wonderful to watch somebody doing magnificent things on
Right.
stage, and what you're viewing somehow goes with what you're hearing.
Yeah,
And it's very hard to trace the connections, but there always is a connection. It's very satisfying.
yeah. They're engaging all the senses with
That's right.
poetry.
And the more senses you engage, the better.
Yeah, definitely. I now also have another poem for you.
All right.
Transitioning to questions about translation, but before that, I'm sure you probably read this a lot of times, but bilingual, bilingue.
Oh, sure. Yes, this one is very popular with students, and they read it very often in the Poetry Out Loud competition.
Right.
Well, this is based on truth, too. My father wouldn't let me speak English in the house because, I want you to hold on to your first
Right,
language and not
right.
lose it. And he was right. He was absolutely right, and I'm very grateful. But at first, I used to fight him and say, I want to tell you how I heard it in school. This is what they said. No, no, no. If it can be said in any language, it can be said in Spanish. Okay. Bilingual, bilingue. My father liked them separate. One there, one here, allá y aquí, as if aware that words might cut in two his daughter's heart, el corazón, and lock the alien part to what he was, his memory, his name, su nombre, with a key he could not claim. English outside this door, Spanish inside, he said, y basta. But who can divide the world, the word, mundo y palabra, from any child? I knew how to be dumb and stubborn, testaruda. Late in bed, I hoarded secret syllables I read until my tongue, mi lengua, learned to run where his stumbled. And still the heart was one. I like to think he knew that, even when, proud, orgulloso of his daughter's pen, he stood outside mis versos, half in fear of words he loved, but wanted not to hear. It's a kind of tribute to my father,
Thank you.
who was very faithful to his own culture.
Oh,
Did you retain Korean?
yes, it was similar to me. Like my parents would not let me speak Spanish inside the house, which is
see.
like, well, English was still. I just learned it at school, so I didn't necessarily speak it socially, so it was not a problem. But Spanish was my main language as I was growing up
Spanish was.
because I went to Peru when I was
That's
3.
right. And that's the one you kept.
Yes, I kept all 3, but definitely Spanish is better than the Korean as well.
That's interesting.
Yeah. And so like, yeah, so the next question is actually about speaking these different languages too. And so I was just very curious about the fact that you started writing in Spanish, right?
Yes.
And then you moved on to English. But I want to hear like how was that transition? Like more about like how it happened. I guess.
That was an interesting transition because I fell in love with the sound of poetry first, and I was much too young to grasp any of the meaning. I did not know there was a what to it at all, because what seduced me through the ears was the how, the music of it. And I thought of poetry the way a child would, as a kind of game, as play, what accompanies play. And it was beautiful to listen to, and I would swing to it the way I would swing to music and learn to dance that way. It was not until I came to this country and was very homesick. I missed my family very, very much because it was a large and very loving family, and it was all gone overnight, suddenly. So I became maybe more thoughtful about things than I had been. And then I started to read poetry in English in elementary school in PS 94 in New York. And I realized that poetry was not a game, that it was a game, but it was a game with a lot of serious stuff inside it. And that the serious stuff was really what kept it going, what made it so important in the world. And I realized that the two things have to go together. That the how and the what have to work together. That the game and the thought under it have to work together. So I really discovered the heart of poetry in English, although I had discovered the joy of it in Spanish. And that was the difference. I found it exciting beyond words that you could do it in other languages. I was delighted. I thought, this doesn't have to be in Spanish. It can be in any language in the world. And after that, of course, I realized that my friends that I used to visit and trade foods with and trade words with and so on, that they all had poetry in the house in some other language I couldn't speak. So I realized how universal it is. And I got to wonder, why has this thing, which I thought of as play, gone all over the world? There is not a culture that doesn't have some version of it. And they all cover more or less the same things, life and death and love and loss and all the things that really matter in human life. And I realized that's what it's for.
That's true. Yeah.
And then, of course, I went back to my own language and discovered that, of course, it's every bit as serious a form of play in Spanish. And it was a delight rediscovering.
Do you still write in Spanish?
Yes, I do. I do. And I'm always thrilled to pieces when something comes in Spanish, because it doesn't happen that often. But when it does, it's like a kind of link to my grandmother.
Right. And like the poem we just read too, like, do you feel like code switching, like they call it, like when you're using Spanish and English in the same context?
I don't do that very often. I think this is the only poem in which I do it consistently, because I don't like Spanglish.
Yeah. Okay.
I don't like it at all. I think that it tends to cheapen both languages. It tends to destroy the vocabulary. Because I've heard people in Spanish say, for instance, abre la window. And I think, but why are you saying window when the word ventana exists in Spanish and it's a perfectly good word? If you do that often enough, you lose chunks of your own language.
I see.
And if you do it in reverse, if you stick Spanish words into English, you never learn the English ones. So I think in order to be bilingual, you need to speak two whole languages, not half of this one and half of that one, and then mix them.
That's what they say about it in like language classes. They emphasize that point. But it's interesting that you do like use both of them in this poem, but then it's based on craft rather than.
It's because what it illustrates is what I was up to at that point in my life. What I wanted to do. What I wanted to do was to mix, but I ended up not doing, thanks to my father.
I see.
That's why it's a tribute to him.
Right. Yes, I definitely mix a lot of Korean with like my Spanish, because and that's probably why my Korean is not as good.
It's hard not to do.
It is.
The temptation is there right from the beginning.
I also want to hear, like, what do you feel like there are differences in texture? Like, definitely there are differences in texture between the languages, right? Between English and Spanish, but how do you feel that affects the way you write, like certain things?
I just write whatever comes to me. I listen for it. I think most of writing, or at least when I do it, most of it is a matter of listening internally, because something speaks the poem to you. And you just listen, and you don't force it to do what it doesn't want to do. So I really don't give it any instructions. I do editing afterward, of course. That's another job. But the languages are certainly different, because, for instance, I found English at first like a marching of boots. It's very accented. It's very strong. It's this is silly, but it's a masculine language.
I can see.
It's a masculine language, whereas the Romance languages are softer. They don't mark such a marked difference between the accented syllables and the unaccented ones. The thing flows more gently. It sounds more like water over stones, whereas English is very iambic, Ta-tum, 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 ta-tum. And I love that. I love the strength of it. I took a semester of Anglo-Saxon. That was love at first hearing. Wonderful language, exciting. But I like the softness of all the Romance languages too, and especially my own. And I hear that difference. And I have tried to bring into English also some of the forms from Spanish. For example, the decima.
Oh, that's really interesting.
Oh, the decima is a beautiful form, 10-line form with interlinked rhyming, and very soft because the rhyme links it all together. And there is something, well, there are various forms that I've tried to move back and forth from one language to the other.
Yeah, definitely. Could you read us our one more poem? And this one pertains to the last question, but it is called On the Impossibility of Translation.
Oh, yes. Well, you know, everybody says it's become a truism. Translation is impossible. And it is. It is really, because you can't take a poem, a genuine poem, out of its language into another one as if it were luggage being put in another valise. The closest thing you can do is to write a poem in the second language that is as like it as possible, in tone, in linguistic capacity, in the form. I try to imitate the rhyme scheme, imitate the meter as much as I can. But it is a different poem, and you can only fool the reader through his ear into believing that he is listening to the original. But of course, in addition to being impossible, poetry is the translation of poetry is also essential. Because just imagine how small our languages would be if we had in them nothing that came to us from another culture.
Right. Yes, it's true.
Would shrink to this.
Yeah. All the influences.
Oh my God! Imagine English literature, for instance, without the Bible.
Yeah, that's the biggest example. Yeah.
All of them. On the impossibility of translation. Of course impossible. Transmuting touch and color into sound, sound into sign, sign into sense again and back. Too much struggling after the names for flavor, line, knowing they can't be found. No, not in one language. In two, across the grain of speech, unthinkable. Easier to fold the sun into its syllable. Yet lovers, each mute in one skin, can learn to speak in tongues, speak themselves whole, if only once. You've heard, fitful above the fields, the summer sung in high cascading turns of fluent bird, and seen in shallow pools in every town how rain translates the sky and writes it down.
Thank you. That's great. In your bio of her placing these designs, I read one of your goals is lowering the barriers between the cultures you consider yourself part of in encouraging the art of translation and literary exchange, especially among students and young people of many backgrounds.
Yes.
Could you tell us more about your take on why translation is, I guess you were talking about it more, but I guess why translation is so important in that more like community?
Well, I think right now, always really, but right now more than ever maybe, we need to speak to one another. We have turned ourselves all over the world, in so many places, into armed camps. And we are throwing things at each other.
Right.
And we should not be throwing things at each other. We should be handing each other things that we need mutually. And I think that translation is a very important part of that, because what the translator does is, well, what the poet does, but the translator takes it across national lines, is to tell people, you see, this fellow who looks so different from you, who speaks a different language, who eats very different food, really is as afraid of what you fear as you are. He loves his family as much as you do yours. He has the same desires, the same doubts about himself and about everything else. He is really much more like you than you think. And if you only get to know the inside of his mind, you'll discover that we're all one family. Which the science of genetics has now told us is quite literally true. We really are one family. Very distant cousins, but so what? Family is family, right? Or as my mother-in-law would have said, mishpucha. And I like that feeling. I like being part of something very, very large in space and in time. And I think that translation is how we make that happen.
Those bridges, those
Yes, that's
connections.
right. We have to get rid of those. We have to get rid of the negative view of the other, because the other is really just a relative we haven't met yet.
Thank you. I guess this is the last question, but will there be a new book coming out? You were talking
Yes.
a little bit about the CD and
Yes.
also translation, but
Well, I'm working on one now. I'd like it to be finished, at least as a manuscript, maybe by the end of this year or early next year, because it's been a long time since I put out a whole book. And I'm planning one that has translations in it, that has old poems as well as new ones in it, because I do have a lot of new ones that have not appeared in book form yet.
I'll look forward to it. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Wonderful.
Wonderful.